Welcome everyone. I know people will just sort of be showing up. I'm using my bad backdrop today, and I'm definitely not in my usual garb. Reason for that is I just finished hosting the CUNA Tech and Operations Council and Member Experience Virtual Conference, which was really amazing. And I'm going to chat about that just to kind of talk about CUNA Councils a little bit. Before we go, this is Town Hall 34, and it's, gosh, 34 of these. We continue to find new opportunities to discuss. A lot of great things came out of the CUNA piece. So just talking about our sponsors real fast. CUNA, the CUNA Councils Group, which is the National Association that advocates for the entire credit union group. They've got a ton of councils. There's marketing, there's tech, there's ops. There's lending. For those of you that haven't been, it's a great thing. And I have to say, and I'll throw it to Kevin as well, Kevin Sarber, our president, who just joined us. I thought for a virtual conference, they tried one a couple, what was it, about 7 years ago for Scimitar, right, Kevin?
Yeah.
That didn't go so well. But this one, I don't know. What was your take on it, Kevin? Since I'm a host, I'm somewhat biased.
I thought it was fantastic for their first pass at a virtual conference. I thought they did a great job. And at some point you had the host and things had to be transferred to a 3-person panel with another host who was questioning it. And that all was just seamless. And I was a little worried, but I guess people are getting a lot of practice and getting really familiar with it. But it was pretty flawless where I was.
That's awesome. Tom, were you on your panel?
Yes, so Andrew and I we actually did a live panel. We were given the option to record it and have it broadcast, but we did it live.
You said, "Shit, we're not nerds. We're gonna do this live."
Right. We're going all right to the deep end, and it went well. I mean, we really, I thought the way they did it and the way it was presented, I think it all worked pretty well. People were in attendance or how many attended our panel.
Your panel had about 160 people watching.
Oh, good.
Yep, I was getting stats as they went. What's that, Andrew?
I said, oh, nice.
Yeah.
So Tom definitely is the nerd there because he prepared.
Well, we didn't expect, that was the whole point, was to have a juxtaposition of two different, unprepared versus prepared. So you did good. So anyways, I just want to thank CUNA Councils for sponsoring this and continuing to sponsor this, and to bring me in as the host was really cool. And I enjoyed it. It was definitely a strong play. We're also sponsored by MemberPass, and the folks at MemberPass is the hassle-free way to really prove your identity, which is becoming a major big deal as COVID reinvents itself. It's also going to be a big deal as to whether people are vaccinated or not, and they're talking to some folks about that. So if you haven't gone to memberpass.com, you know how long it takes to validate someone in the call center. You got to ask them 50 questions, and make them dance, and then if that all works, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 minutes later, if they're not so frustrated they hung up on you, then you can talk to them. This makes it one simple thing on their phone, and boom, they're in, and they're much more comfortable with it. Best Innovation Group, for those of you that don't know, I'm the CEO of Best Innovation Group, and we do cool things for credit unions. We have our Innovation Club. We also have a product called Five, which brings Alexa and Google Home, brings your account information to Alexa and Google Home, which is really starting to really drive forward with the need for touchless and ADA. So we've been pleasantly surprised with the business there. And as always, CU Broadcast, Mike Lawson and his group, who when I first said, hey, I'm going to do this, he said, hey, can I jump in? And I said, always. And so he just, Mike plus anything makes it better. So, except for he's not here today. So I just mentioned who I am, and that's Mike. He's not here, he's camping. Let's move on to the next slide because our guest is here. We have Brian Roemmele with us. Brian, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. So Brian has so many different hats and so many things he's done. And this slide does not do him justice. He's the founder and CEO of Multiplex, Payfinders, and First American Card Service. But also for a while you were an advisor to, was it one of the White administrations, weren't you?
Which administration? I'm sorry.
You were advisor. I can't. Was it Obama's administration? You were an advisor.
I helped the chief, one of the chief economic advisors to Obama, create a couple of presidential orders, which allowed for faster paying of net terms. So the government was running net terms that are normally 30 days into about 8 to 14 months. And that was really hurting entrepreneurs. So we helped craft legislation that would fix that. And that was extended into the private sector, Apple, IBM, Hewlett Packard, and about 600 companies promised to pay small and medium-sized businesses on net 15 terms. And that boosted the economy. It still does by trillions of dollars by stopping the need to get short-term credit for small businesses. So
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy to have helped on that.
Oh yeah, AR is a big issue. Can you work on net negative 15? That would be great for me.
Yeah, that'd be nice. But it's an interesting space because it's something I've known for quite a long time. But I was really fascinated that most of the academics that were tracking the economy had no clue how much money was held in accounts receivable, and what transformations it would have for business. It's kind of slipping back in a sense right now because of the pandemic. Unfortunately, some net terms I'm seeing are running back into 6 and 8 months. There was not enough teeth in legislation because it was a presidential order, but it is something that should be reconsidered to have more implications for companies that hold that money on their books, because that's money held on books that's due and payable to another party. So it artificially inflates that public company, and some people researching it wonder how that money is being accounted for. So interesting.
Yeah, no,
times.
that is fascinating. And I think that's the first topic I want to go to. Before I do, I can give you Tom O'Shea's version of it. I think Tom tells me he throws away the first 3 invoices, right, Tom? And you pay the 4th one, right?
Yeah.
You burn the first 2, that's it, and then throws away the 3rd one, and then
Of course, we've given him a wrong phone number in the first place.
yeah, because you gave him a bad address and the wrong phone number, right?
Right.
You gave him Andrew Bertrand's information. Gotcha. Well, anyways, what you got on the line here is you have a whole bunch of Crayons, Brian, and they are people from all different walks of life in the Crayons, kind of people you like, not just all CEOs, although Tom is one, but everybody all the way, there's a pile of people on here that just make a lot of the country's finances go from the Crayon space. And
Sure.
we just got done listening to the chief economist for CUNA, which is a group that works with us with all the credit unions, kind of give us his outline for the economy, along with another fellow who I forget which portion he was with, but I'd be interested in your take. I mean, if you guys, by the way, I'll put it, or Melissa will put it in the chat. If you're not following Brian on Twitter, you're missing out. The insights and things he posts are incredible. He's one of the few people I actually have an alert on because I like to read whatever he posts.
Wow, thank you.
No, I absolutely do. Him and the guy who plays Pee Wee Herman, both those guys are, I don't know. I like to know that
All right, good company.
Yeah. Anyways, talk to us a little bit. I know you're monitoring this from your positions in the, in the various areas that you've been working in. What are you seeing? You just mentioned a little bit, but what else are you seeing? If you were in the seat of these folks who are trying to figure out what the heck is going to happen and how to deal with this and the ups and downs of the stimulus and everything else, kind of what's your view?
Well, first off, I got to tell you, thank you for having me on. This is an absolute pleasure and honor. And thanks for all the attendees here. So, I do a lot of advising. I have clients, some have been with me for over 35 years. And so that's a testament of my accuracy I've had with them.
Oh, yeah.
And my very first report about what I've been calling the 2020 pandemic, because it may be more than one virus, and, locking it down to COVID or, anything like that, I think in hindsight will kind of be interesting. So anyway, I started writing about it in November of 2019, when we started seeing the rise of new viruses that were coming around Wuhan. And my interest sparked because I am very much involved in the technology space. I know Wuhan was basically ground zero for all technology development, from iPhones, 5G, artificial intelligence, everything you could, even quantum computing to some level. And of course, biological research, needless to say. A couple of my friends that worked within a factory started noticing people were getting extremely sick very rapidly. And so that, again, I'm not a government entity, so I just noted that, and I put out a report that the supply chain is going to be impacted. That was my first report in November. In December, I started getting very concerned because I started seeing sort of a quiet shutdown of some of the operations, and they were attributing it to holidays. It's never been done like that ever. I've been tracking, the development of the electronic sector for decades, especially in China, and they've never shut down some of these 24-hour plants.
No, they could run them. They run them 67 hours if they could.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
that's way off the unbelievable.
Yeah, so John, exactly. So that concerned me, and then I started looking at it from a world economic standpoint. I said, well, again, still limiting it to maybe a regionalized pandemic, but definitely a pandemic, in my view, more than an epidemic. And I said to myself, well, this is going to really impact the supply chain immensely. So I started advising all of my clients to adjust, if they are involved in manufacturing, adjust their supply chain coming out of Wuhan. Quite a number did, 27 did, and they did very well because of that. By that one flash, all those companies were able to pre-order and have ready supplies that would have otherwise have not been there. So that really helped them. And others that are in the financial and investment sector, they adjusted their portfolios and they did very well. And then, of course, in January, I started putting out that to me, it was going to become a world pandemic, probably centered in Asia, but spreading across Europe and the United States. And that's kind of what happened. So that's the history. Moving forward, I started realigning what I believe would be the restructuring of cities, of businesses. So cities would become a difficult process because of the 1919 pandemic. So all we need to do is go back to history and we start looking at that and we say, well, what happened in that epoch? Well, let's just look at it. And so I pulled up microfiche and microfilms because almost none of this stuff is on the internet. And I have a really good library of this stuff. Yeah,
I haven't heard the word microfiche in a long time.
John, I do a lot of work in microfiche because I would say about 80% of our history is not on the internet. And what I mean by our history is that as being recorded contemporaneously by reporters at that time.
Oh yeah, like all the articles, like, yeah, you'd have to. They're probably like Andrew's a millennial. He probably didn't even know what we're talking about. But
yeah, so I pull up the microfiche and I started getting goosebumps. My wife's looking at me, what's going on? I'm like, they were wearing gauze masks, and of course the gauze did nothing because the gauze, it was literally gauze. Mm-hmm. People were getting shot in the street for not wearing it in San Francisco, New York, Chicago. And I said, wow, there's going to be a lot of social implications. We're probably going to see a restructuring of how cities work. And we're going to see a backlash within the economy and mostly a backlash within the youth. Why? Because schools were shut down during the pandemic in 1918 and 1919. And obviously that was a different generation, a different epoch, but it created 1920. So 1920 became sort of an era where the children that were reaching their prime around, the teenagers, the young 20s, college students, to 1925, 1926. What do we have in that era? Look at the peak of 1926. We had this sort of expression of, some would say a debasing of the culture is what most of the newspaper
20s,
were
right?
saying. Yeah, and there's a lot of aspects of the Roaring 20s, and we can really take that apart because I am predicting a new roaring 20s, a tremendous expansion in the economy in ways that a lot of people can't imagine. What came out of that pandemic era, and of course, all pandemics end, plagues end. They always do. And in the era that they happen, everybody thinks that they don't end, and that we need some miracle, whether it's let's call it religious divine intervention or medical intervention or gauze masks, whatever. At the end of the day, all forms of viruses mutate to a form that's less lethal. Why? Because they want to survive. And if they kill the host too quickly, they're not going to survive. And it's not like they're sentient. It's just the law of nature. It's really evolution. So no matter what anybody's going to tell you, and by the way, I have absolutely.
By the way,
no
I completely
credentials.
believe you. I just don't believe 2020 is going to end. I believe.
Yeah, I know
the
what you mean by that.
Yeah,
Oh, no. Oh, all right. So, but see, and I think you've been on this pulse so accurately, John. So I think you resonate with this because I follow everything you do. So if you look at what's going on, we are transforming society much faster because we are in an information age than we did in 1918, 1920 sort of epoch. So one of the first things that took off after the pandemic in the 1918, 1919 period was the telephone. The telephone was a technology that was available. I mean, it was a turn of century invention, essentially. It was available for everybody, but nobody saw the need for it. It was a technology that was like, well, it's an extravagance. We don't really need it. I think, and again, don't quote me on exact numbers, but it was less than 6.5% of the population in the United States.
You've heard the old joke, right?
A telephone.
Who's the best salesman in the world? The guy that sold the first telephone.
Like, yeah, first fax machine too, right?
Yeah, like
it's a network
gonna,
effect,
what's it
right?
do? It calls people. Well, who can I call? Well, so
Nobody.
far me, but other than that. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
there definitely is a chicken and egg for a lot of this stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're on one of the repercussions of it, and it's always kind of cobbled together, Zoom and all these other things. By the way, I mean, they're not perfect technologies. We know this, you know this, you're on this all the time, and it turns out that we're just seeing the precipice of it. We're seeing the fact, hold it, I didn't need to commute 3.5 hours of my life every day to get to work. Hold it, I didn't need to go to that meeting. I could have just sat here and looked at a postage stamp of somebody's head bouncing back and forth. You know, all of a sudden you start actually redefining what's the point of a meeting? What's the point of going into a business? What are you doing at that business? And what psychological purpose did it serve? I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing for people to be home or not to be home. What I'm saying is we're going to be analyzing that. For some people, especially folks that are not inner self-managed or self-motivated, they need to be in an environment where there is a force looking over their shoulder driving them. I don't know what people are doing in offices, moving paper from square A to B, answering a phone. I don't know. I mean, all the stuff you can do at home. You know, and in the banking sector, this is even more prominent and stuff that, I mean, you've been talking about for a long time, myself, certainly Brett King and others. You know, you kind of look at it and say, well, what is a bank? What is a financial institution? What do they serve? You know, and when you start breaking those things down and you realize that this is an opportunity, it's not a quagmire, it's an opportunity to reinvent all of these elements so that they actually work better, not only under the conditions of a pandemic, but moving forward, because a lot of these behaviors are forever going to change the way folks view things. I know a lot of folks that used to, I'm in Southern California right now. Well, not at this moment. I'm actually in the wilderness of Wyoming, but you know, I live in Southern California. That's why you don't have a postage stamp of my head bouncing around and my arms running around in the air. I'm on a satellite internet connection. But so some of my friends in Southern California that had 3-hour commutes, I mean, they started looking at that and he said, in those 3 hours, I could actually do my entire job, and the rest of my day, just the hours they wasted on a commute, and the rest of my day is open for X, Y, or Z. And a lot of it was obviously now helping their kids learn at school. But I've known some people to take on new hobbies. I have friends that have become amateur astronomers, guitarists, rock collectors, all these things I'm into. They're saying, now I know why you do these things. And I'm like, yeah, you know, you're actually learning and you're flexing the mental muscle, the ability for your mind to absorb new ideas and thought. And they're not hobbies as much as ways to look at problems differently. And so telecommuting, absolutely massive change in every business. Remote manufacturing is already taking place. The ability for you to interact with a robotic system to control a machine, where you can have one person operating virtually amongst 20 or 30 factories. That's already happening. I know folks in Wuhan that are doing that right now. I know one individual who worked one particular machine. He was very adept at it. He's working 9 of them at once, essentially, through a robotic device. And he's sitting in his apartment in rural China right now. And they just gave him a network connection. They paid him double what he did before, and he's working from home. So that's changing. So now if you start transitioning this out, what do cities look like? Well, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, some of the amenities of a city become less relevant. And I saw this in 1918, 1919. When I put out my February bulletin, I said, if restaurants close down in cities, cities will become more or less irrelevant because the businesses are already going to shut down. And what I mean by businesses, I mean the ones at the bottom floor and the ones upstairs. The ones at the bottom floor will probably go first because retail is going to wind up dissipating. And then the people upstairs are going to go away because a lot of those folks are going to realize that they didn't need to go into that building. Why were they going there? Why were they commuting? What was the point of it? And so you have this sort of inner journey of thought that not only every human being is going through, but every manager, every CEO, everybody in the C staff, if they're not in this new mindset of, okay, what does this look like? How am I reinventing this business? And what is this opportunity? I mean, I had a teleconference symposium in March, and everybody on the call was a C-level executive. And I said, you're in the process of reinventing your business. And if you don't do it, your competitors will do it for you. There's no choice in the matter.
Well, the change is what levels the playing field, right? Because consumers are having to find other ways to do things. But let me, I want to dig into one thing you said, actually 2 things you said, because you said a lot of amazing things. So if we're jumping into, like, for example, you know, everybody here will tell you that the home rates are going nuts. You know, home sales, you know, Tom, I'm sure you guys, you know, mortgages are your number one thing. And so is that a product of the Fed rates and the deals? Or is that a product of what you were just saying, this migration? So that's question 1. And then question 2 is, everybody here is right where you just said. As a matter of fact, I just held the first day of a meeting where I had, I don't know, a couple hundred people on, and we debated work from home. Does it continue? Does it not continue? What I'm hearing from you is that if someone, it does, if you choose, like, that's going to be dictated to you, because if all your competitors choose work from home, then getting talent from your organization, if you're trying to hire people, is going to be really difficult, because if they have the choice, they're going to choose to work from home. So those are my 2 questions. I'll let you take the first one.
Wonderful questions, John. So let me do an aside first, and don't let me forget the questions because I go down.
I wrote them down.
All right. So I started seeing this trend in the Silicon Valley about 8 years ago. And oddly enough, it started with COBOL programmers. And you'll have a good assimilation with this.
COBOL 77, baby.
Yeah, I had mobs going after me about COBOL still being so
I remember
well
when we
used.
talked, we both had that issue when the PPP and the loans came
they were
out.
attacking you too, man. I was
know.
like, get the tar and feathers before they get John.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but COBOL programmers, because they are sort of elite in the sense that most young programmers find it boring or find it or they've been educated by the educational system that the language is dead and it's not being used. This is classic of what we see in computer science departments. They're educating everybody to do Swift programming, and there's too many Swift programmers and not enough COBOL programmers. So this is classic of what happens in academia when it's disconnected from the real world of what people are using computers for. COBOL works. It'll probably outlive our great-great-great-grandchildren. It's not like I take relish in that. I'm just saying machines work, gears work. When I go out and I see gears in my transmission or even in a Tesla, I don't get mad and say, damn it, they're still using gears. This is not fair. We need new technology. You know, it's like, no, gears work. And COBOL is a form of a gear. And it just happens to be a different form of technology. So anyway, I started seeing that, and I had a friend, he was really down on his luck. He had gone through a really bad relationship, a divorce, and all this kind of thing. And he had some technology background. I said, learn COBOL. And now he's back with his wife, living in Hawaii as a COBOL programmer, making over $300,000 a year. And his wife.
Wait, I already know
COBOL.
COBOL. I'm not in Hawaii. I have a wife, but okay, I'm writing that down.
I write it down, man. There's still more. What is it? 3,000 to 1. There's 3,000 jobs.
Well, you know why COBOL will outlive us now? Because that particular language always gets gains every time the processors are updated. It's all about how it was written. And it was written at such a low level that when IBM updates their processors, there's other languages like PLA that begin, or even Fortran, that begin to get diminishing returns because because of the equipment that's out there. But for whatever reason, COBOL, the way it was written, every new processor will make it go 20x faster. And so and not only that, but there's literally, I don't know, what do you think, billions of lines of COBOL out there?
Billions and billions. I don't think it's possible to calculate at this point because it's being updated on a mass scale, especially because of the pandemic. I even did some COBOL coding myself on some of these governmental systems that during PPP and things like that. So that was the trend I started seeing. Then I started seeing it extend throughout most of Silicon Valley, but there was still this Mark Zuckerberg in a hoodie coming from Harvard, living in eating ramen noodles in a house in the Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, and every VC wanted this classic image, a movie image of the founder in the valley, hacking away at code. And I said, I have a lot of VCs, some on Sand Hill Road. I said, guys, that's a romantic vision that's long gone. The next big thing will not look like that. And you should know better. And stop romanticizing that, because that's over. Love or hate Mark, whatever. The bottom line is everybody's still living in that mindset that it's going to be some young kid in a hoodie that's going to do it. No, it's probably not. Likely it's going to be the polar opposite that's going to be the very next big thing, because the very next big thing is usually what you don't expect it to be, coming from a source where you least suspect it. It's always like that. But the venture capital world is still plowing endless amounts of money into that process, even though more and more people with talent started saying, no, I'll work from Kansas, thank you, or I'll work from Wyoming. I mean, down where I am right now, there's about, 400 people that I know of that are pretty much forming businesses, mostly on blockchain and Bitcoin. Wyoming created one of the first laws.
Yep, they just passed a law.
Wyoming is going to become one of the central areas for all sorts of blockchain and inventions, tokenizations, Bitcoin even, and we could one day or later on here dive into that. It's very very exciting. In fact, John, I've not seen this level of excitement since the iPhone was first released amongst developers. There is just a teeming of interest and people just moving out of the Bay Area, moving out of Austin, moving out of New York, East Coast, and just coming out into the wilderness and saying, you know what, I'd rather code and hike. Most of the people I know, they code for 3 or 4 hours, hike the rest of their day. And that's the new lifestyle.
But that's where it started, was with guys that could do that. Like, I was forced to hire one of my guys. He literally lives in an RV, but I could not find anyone that was capable of doing the level of math on elliptical curve key processing and what it takes
Yeah.
to do, the algorithms around that anywhere else. My other option would have been Helsinki. And so,
Yeah.
and we're going to see that more and more.
Yeah.
I'll throw out my one little thing. Here's my thing that you'll chew on. I know you'll like this, Brian. Here's a future C-level position that all of you will have. Announcement. Write this down. Chief cryptographer.
Oh, yeah.
You will have a chief
Yes.
cryptographer. The reason you will have a chief cryptographer is because cryptography will be as important to you as lending or data analytics or anything else. It will be one of the most important positions in your entire organization. I said it here
100%.
first.
Oh yeah, 100%. Fully endorse that, John. And I would go on to say that it is probably one of those positions that there is no real, what I would call real accurate college course that's
No.
teaching it.
No,
I mean,
YouTube would be your best option.
Yeah, seriously. So your next cryptographer is probably going to come from, unfortunately, some of the rebellious Bitcoin world. I mean, when I first started mining Bitcoin, all the major cryptographers I knew actually were self-taught, and they were building algorithms. They were tearing apart RSA and all these different cryptographies and key systems, and they're saying, "Oh, this is going to be the future." And when you start realizing what they were saying, they were literally decades ahead.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of folks misunderstood what Bitcoin is and was even back then, and certainly today. This idea that it's just a form of money. There's so much more that's going on, even at this moment. But again, we'll dive into that in maybe later.
When you get out of the wilderness.
Yeah, when we get out of the wilderness. So now we have these folks that are literally living the lifestyle that they like. They're typically in their mid to mid 20s to mid 30s. They're active, or they want to be active. They want to be away from large population centers for 1,000 different reasons, because a lot of them got burnt out on it. I mean, if you've lived in Dogpatch in San Francisco for 3 or 4 years, even if you're getting paid top dollar, it's a very drudgery experience. I mean, sure, dorm lifestyle is great for a certain period of time. Then the great table and the exposed brick and recycled wood and everybody screaming and everybody on headphones and people not talking, all these combinations and eating the same food downstairs, fusion food. After a while, it literally grates on you. And a lot of these people had burnout. I said, you have burnout, you need to get out of your environment. So that's kind of where they went. So now we're going to start seeing that extend to the greater whole, and that's the rest of the world. How is that going to extend? So you analyze as a CEO every single job, and you say, why am I having this person why am I having them leave a box, go into a box that moves to come into this box? Is it to feed our organizational ego? And I bring this up in a lot of my...
Man, you said so much cool stuff here. Organizational ego, I love that. I had a saying the other day, I called it organizational trauma.
Well, same premises, yeah. So in my first symposium, I brought that up, and a lot of people kind of had hard feelings. I said, don't get hurt on this. Every organization has an ego. And I go, look around your headquarters. What is it you're trying to say, and who is it you're trying to say it to? And when it's really finally analyzed, most of the organizational ego is designed for hiring. It's designed for an esprit de corps. It's designed to make the workers at the business stay at the business because they're quote unquote winning. And the moment the business feels like it's not winning, obviously it's binary, they're losing. Either you're growing or dying, right? In business, this is like nature. And so I said, you're now going to have to be tasked with redefining what winning is and what organizational ego looks like. And if you don't do it, your competitors are going to do it and steal your workers. It's as simple as that. And you don't have a choice in the matter. And anybody who's got a really big headquarters right now, they have a big piece of real estate that's going to be functionally less valuable over the arc of the next 10 years than it was over the arc of the prior 10 years. And this goes from Apple's, mothership to anybody else who just opened up a big headquarters. Now, I've been advising people not to open centralized headquarters for the past 25 years And, I was going against the grain so much, I had to stop saying it because people would get angry at me. I said, make regionalized areas. And it's like, well, this violates our, I go, no, it hurts your organizational ego. And you don't want that. And a lot of CEOs, unfortunately, are stuck in this quagmire that, again, you don't normally talk about this stuff in the general public because, I have no problem one-on-one with CEOs. I mean, I go, listen, you have an organizational ego, you have your own personal ego, you have an ego within the C-suite of the corporation and the manager level, and you have to do things to feed that. And prior to the pandemic, I would be talking about how technology feeds that. What is the glamorous technology that you bring in? About a year after the iPhone was released, I said the glamour technology is bring your own device. Yep. And I would get into wars with MIS departments, if anybody remembers what those are. And yep. I had a target on my back, DP and MIS departments. How dare you? There's no security. And I go, that you don't get it. These are consumption systems. I go, just, they're very lightweight consumption systems for the employees. Let them feel the liberation by having this. And so, John, that's kind of where this all started. With the rise of the supercomputer in the pocket that we call the iPhone or the Android device, we have put into motion a series of dominoes that have led us to here, which I would say at the beginning of the post-pandemic era, where people are beyond mobile. They are no longer mobile in a sense. What that really means is that, yes, people are going to be leaving the cities because the amenities of cities are not going to make as much sense. Unfortunately, the local or very short-term political turmoil obviously adds to that. I have no input one way or the other what that means, but I think anybody who lives in the city or observes the city knows what I'm talking about. And then you kind of look at, well, how these people are getting older. What are they doing? They're in milestone mode. What's milestone mode? Every human being experiences it. They don't have a choice. And it's either thrusted upon them or they try to avoid it. But milestone mode is pair bonding, right? Getting married, if you will. And again, I'm going to use traditional milestones, and we could have alternative milestones, but it's easier to talk about the traditional ones. And each milestone is a financial impact to somebody's life. The very first milestone for most people is probably getting into college or university. We already know that that's broken to a certain level, right? The next milestone is maybe their first automobile. Contrary to popular insight, people are still buying cars and the kids are still buying cars. Maybe not to the veracity as they once did because of cities, because of public transportation, because of the bad economy extending their existence within their parents' homes. That's another thing. But you have these financial milestones: getting married, big financial milestone; having children, or buying a house. Getting married or buying a house, usually within the same thing. Having children, having those children to go to college. So those are the major sort of, or getting married to, your children getting married. So whenever I sat down with banks and advised them, I would lay out these milestones. And there's about 25 of them that I would pick out. And I would show how important those relationships are to those milestones. So when I'm talking to somebody who's creating financial relationships, I say, how do you know and anticipate what these milestones are? And do you believe any futurist that tells you that those milestones are going away? Because if you do, your business will probably not exist. Because every one of those milestones would exist simply because you and I wouldn't have been here unless somebody made those choices. It literally comes down to replication of the human species. And again, you have to extract the politics. Everybody's going to try to throw a political slant on all this. Biology is irrelevant to politics. You got here through a biological process. That is a fact, and it's indisputable. And these biological processes start with or without your permission from the moment you are born or conceived, if you will, to the moment you pass on to another life, if you will. So what can one learn from these milestones? Well, I advise anybody that's creating a financial relationship, whether it's a new financial relationship or an old one, whether you're an legacy banking organization or a fintech startup, you better respect these milestones, and you better respect the thinking that takes place as one reaches every one of these milestones. It's otherwise euphemistically called growing older, right? When one grows older, they view the world through a different lens. And anybody who's gone through one or two or three of these milestones knows that maybe their Pokemon cards don't mean as much when they drive their car for the first time. Or maybe, their video game doesn't make it as much sense, hopefully, when they meet their wife or their husband. I don't know. Some of these things change. So what a lot of people have been winding into this sort of techno class of younger generation. I hate using the term of millennial because it's really a misnomer. It's just a younger generation. It's no different than any younger generation. Every generation is classified in a similar type of thing, all the way to Plato. These kids these days, they don't do that. I mean, you can go back historically. So they are realizing the city is not offering them what they thought it was offering them, and they're already moving out in mass. How do we know that? By the statistics. When did those statistics start? The big expansion started around April, the beginnings of it, and it just perpetuated to the point where entry-level homes are pretty much non-existent in most of what we would call the primary, secondary, and third-level suburbs throughout the United States. And we're also seeing this percolate throughout the world, Europe, Asia, things of that level. So
wait, that's a real important concept. I want to ask a question on that. So the milestone, we do definitely follow these milestones. And so this first home, what we call a first in mortgages, that, well, it's not the first in the sense it's the first lien, but it's your first home. And so if these homes, and I do agree with you, I want to say, I'm in a suburb here, kind of outside the Air Force Academy, not far from where you are actually. And, I would say, there aren't a lot of, there are no starter homes in my neighborhood for, say, my son who is 22 and engaged. If he wanted to sort of, take his bride and go get a home, his options would be a lot different. So what does that mean for the folks, like you just said, that are providing these services to plan? So is that just going to keep, now that we don't have the limitations of him trying to find a job nearby and he's already very digital, are you saying that he's willing to move out like into the woods to get a bigger home? I'm extrapolating and probably jumping to the end of your story, and I apologize. But
no, precisely.
Is that where you're going? Okay.
Yeah. No, this is absolutely, John. You got it right on the head. So what's going to happen is, where we would see a lack of housing, and a lot of people will think, well, this is a gentrification of some of the worn out downtown Main Street areas. It's not necessarily that. This is actually a ruralification. These are folks that are actually moving far more rural than we've ever seen before. And it's not a repudiation of what the city represented. It's a repudiation of what their entire lifestyle themselves represented. See, this is a cathartic internal journey that people are on. And I think very few people have gotten this pulse. We have all gone through tremendous mental trauma. This society has gone through a tremendous amount of mental trauma, but on a backdrop of a less fortified culture. What I mean by that is not to put down, wimp culture. We have wimpy culture. That's true to a certain extent. What I'm saying is, when the pandemic took place in 1918 and 1919, most people were 1 degree away from their food, right? Most people were either growing their food or they knew the person that grew the food, more or less. They definitely knew the person that got their eggs and their milk, and maybe the butcher who probably knew the cow or knew the farmer, right? This is almost everybody. Even in cities, the butcher would sometimes, render their meats right in their back lot. And a lot of folks can't imagine this, but in New York, if you look at some of the, again, you have to go to microfiche sometimes, some of the pictures of butchers, they all had back lots. Those back lots were not for parking. They were for cows and chickens and pigs. And, Betty would come in and say, I want a fresh pig. And she got one. It was like, give me 10 minutes. Let me find Porky. That's how it was. And so this was a different culture. And what I mean by that is, by being so generational, we're now between 6 and 10 generations away from where our food comes from, where most of our technology comes from, where most of the things that we use. We saw the cracks start forming when the lockdown took place. We had food shortages. We had an imbalance of food distribution. All the food that was supposed to go to restaurants was rotting on the fields. All the commercial grade toilet paper and other things were sitting on shelves, and the entire supply chain was messed up. And we also recognized that too much of the supply chain was outside this country and certainly outside a state. And a lot of the people started saying, I think we ought to build some of this stuff locally. It's something I call hyper-local. And again, something I've been talking about for the last 20 years, much as chagrin to other people who were saying, oh no, everything's going to be centralized and it's going to be offshored. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. It's always temporary, always has been, always will be. Technology won't change it because you can't change the way humans act and think. So it's not really a suburb as much as a ruralification. So the young, to find affordable and available housing, are going to go further and further out into the country. And that's where you're going to see the development take place. And it's not going to be the same type of pattern that we saw, this sort of hub and spoke pattern that we saw coming out of the grand, like the East Coast corridor, or Chicago or Los Angeles, where you could see where the center city was, and then the suburb, and then that got a city-like, and a suburb and the city. This is going to be people like 300-500 miles away from a suburb, and sort of just starting over.
But could work for any of the credit unions that are on this call.
Absolutely, anybody, right? So I really challenge somebody to come up with a job that really needs to be, other than somebody who has to physically, move something from A to B, a job that can't be done remotely. And again, I'm not saying I'm an advocate of remote work all the time. I think psychologically we're going to have to do something else in our culture, because humans are not designed to be in a box living alone in their sweatpants 24/7. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's going to be an issue.
That's part of the restructuring of society.
Right. And so we've got about 13 minutes left, and I love to get some questions from our team. We got some of my favorite people on the call who do questions, but real quickly, you said that you were predicting another roaring 20s, and I don't know, I was kind of thinking, and you can take this for what it's worth, but I feel like we just had our roaring 20s, and I worry that we're headed for the crash of the 36, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, because we overextended that, and we have a culture of non-savers that are related to debt. I think it's a topic for some other time, but but I would love to get you on the podcast and chat about that at some point.
I'd love to dive deep, but let me give you a quick overview, right? Okay. The only reason why there's the non-saver is because there's no incentive to save, right? When we had the highest savings rate amongst the population, we had the highest interest rate. So if you have a net negative interest rate, why would you save? Why wouldn't you speculate? So we're raising a generation of speculators. We would call them the Robin Hooders, right? So if you understand that phenomenon, it's something that myself and a few others have been predicting, is, you look at Tesla stock, or and I'm not bagging on Tesla, I think it's a wonderful company, but you look at Bitcoin itself, for example, a lot of this is based on speculation, but so is interest rate. And what we perceive as money is shifting rapidly because we're not connecting physically with the asset we call cash, right? So understand this premise. When you're not actually moving the cash through your fingers, it becomes ephemeral, it becomes theoretical. And when we see the Fed essentially printing trillions of dollars, we're going to see another round of trillions of dollars. If you're young enough and bright enough, you start scratching your head and ask this question: what is money? What am I doing with my time? Again, part of this inward journey. What am I doing with my time if they can just press a button and another few decimal places can move on a computer and money's created? So the whole relationship that people have with money, what they have with what is a Federal Reserve, what is a bank, what is a currency, what is a form of payment, what is a stock, what does a value in a stock represent? You know, all of these things are going to be put into play. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that is a fact. So if you think the old playbook is going to work, well, there's no value in that stock. Well, I'm like, you're not understanding the psychology of the market. Now, a quick end point about the Roaring '20s. The expansion of the economy is going to take place because of the pent-up restriction of creativity that is being unleashed because of some people working at home and being able to think
all those
in a
extra
more
hours of things they can do,
exactly,
including bad
and
people.
well, yeah, a lot of it.
A lot more
And,
hackers.
a lot more hackers. And you're also going to see the restriction of technologies that would have been released in 2020, but were held back because the supply chain wasn't there. So you're going to see that. You're also going to see the matriculation of these trillions of dollars being pumped into the economy. That has, in worst case scenario, that has a 3 to 5 year lifespan. And so predicting, the only thing that's psychologically going to affect the market is going to be the elections. No matter what side you're on, there's going to be a psychological impact to that. There's going to be a philosophical and all sorts of impacts.
But those always level out. That's every election.
This one's going to be rather different because the inheritance by whoever your team is, your inheritance is going to be much larger than we've seen probably in the last, probably since before World War I. It's probably more like Lincoln's inheritance.
In terms of a dowry or
complexity.
in terms of debt? I mean, you could go either way.
Both good and bad, right?
Yeah.
So why was there a greenback? I wrote a big report about the greenback, and a lot of people think the greenback is the dollar. It's not. Lincoln created this money, and it did not do him justice. It may have ended his time on this earth very early. The greenback was an invention by Lincoln to avert the financial crisis that the country was facing, and it really was a company at that point, United States Incorporated, and that was a heretical, almost charlatan type of move by him. It not only got him elected, it may have saved the country. Listen, the reality is, we're going to enter a world of debt forgiveness that we have never possibly have comprehended. And therefore, what we interpret as money and what we interpret as currency means current, which means flow, right? And a lot of people get disconnected for the roots of these words. It's part of maritime law and all this stuff.
The difference between value and currency, yeah.
Exactly. And we conflate these things, like we conflate the greenback with the dollar. It just happens to be green because the deference to Lincoln. But reality is, there's no way that this generation that took on 100,000, 200,000 worth of debt is going to pay back that debt. Now, if they don't pay back that debt, that is a sense of indentured servitude, right? Because it's it's a debt that cannot.
You're talking the Ready Player One plan.
Yeah, well, yes, possibly, but I think it's going to be more complex than that. And I think no matter who winds up taking the narrative over the next 10 years, there's going to be a comeuppance to what did we create within the educational system? How did we create this monopoly? How did we create a cannot fail monopoly for a particular business? And this goes on. This is going to go on with you don't want to get controversial, it's going to go on with vaccines because you can't sue a vaccine company. You can't sue an educational facility for not giving you an education. These two protected industries are going to face, again, it's going to sound heretical right now, but in 10 years, we'll come back, sit down, John and I be talking and say, yeah, we told you so.
Yeah, well,
People
I
are
mean,
going to say,
it sounded
why?
heretical when I told everybody you need to have everybody capable of working from home, if not doing it already. And I could tell you, up until March, and I'll say there's still. Well, let's man, I could talk to you all day. I really could. And
Thanks,
every
man.
time I do. We have two things that we need to do. One, we need to take a few questions. So let's just shoot it over and see if anybody has any questions. And then the second is we need a moment of silence for Eddie Van Halen, which I'm going to insist on in this particular piece, only because he is the one that inspired me to play music and changed my life. So,
Same here.
so I know you play guitar as well. I know. I've seen your Rickenbackers and all the cool guitars. Who's got a question? Tom, you got something? Yep, he's ready.
Great stuff, Brian. Really insightful. I'm in New Jersey, so we're about 40 minutes outside of New York City. We're a suburb of New York. People live in this area because the hub and spoke, because they're on main train lines and get into New York real quickly. So home sales in our area are just insane. Houses are selling in 24 to 48 hours, always over asking price on the house. And what we're seeing are two things occurring. One is, when young folks have those triggering events, often it's the child, because then they're saying, you know what, the schools aren't, I want the suburban schools, I want more impact on the schools. So they're coming in, but we're also seeing upper middle income, high net worth people that had moved into the city a number of years ago because their commute went from an hour and a half to a 10-minute walk. You had the theaters, you had the restaurants, and I have friends, they would go to the theater every week. They would eat out for dinner in the city 3 or 4 nights a week. Once this hit, the job said, don't come in. And they've now at this point has said, don't ever come in, continue to work for us, but you're never going to come back in. And between these small apartments that they had and this concern over safety and security they're feeling, and the fact that restaurants and theaters are all closed, they've moved out. They sold their apartment or let their lease run out, have moved out to the suburbs, and have said they're not going back to the city. Now, they may go back for the theater if and when that comes back, but they have no plans to go back to the city. We're seeing that happen over and over and over again. So long story short, so what's it going to take? So what happens to these cities? You've got young people that are not going in there, and you've got older, upwardly mobile empty nesters that are running away. What's going to happen to the cities, and how do we restore or redeem them? Because there are segments of the population that don't have that luxury of being able to relocate. They can't afford those theaters and those restaurants. What's going to happen?
Tom, that's a wonderful question. And I'm not predicting that cities will disappear ever. They will always be there because society is always going to have cities. The amenities that drew us to the cities, especially older people, theater, food, museums, they're temporarily or maybe in some ways permanently gone. Some theaters will never be open, at least not as they were. And this is sad. I know musicians that worked in Vegas and New York and LA and San Francisco. These folks they're out of a job permanently, and they may not ever be able to reconstitute what they had in these incredibly talented people. So when it comes back, it's going to come back slowly. The restaurants, we know that some of those are never going to make it again because they were hanging by a thread, and it's a transient sort of business to begin with. You ride a wave and that wave changes. So what happens? It's like a wildfire. And I always go to nature to see what happens because nature has been doing it a few billion years before we've been beta testing it. So when the wildfire goes through, all the big trees are affected, and so is all the kindling on the ground. So unfortunately, everything is taken out to a certain level, but some of the big trees do remain. When you go and you look at the wild oaks in California and there's a wildfire, these oaks are just persistent. They will stay and they'll say, no, my roots are going to grow stronger now, and there's a lot more carbon for me to feed on. And then you start seeing blades of grass shoot up through the ground. And then 2 years later, you have a wonderful ecosystem. So the outrageous prices that we saw in San Francisco and New York, they're going to be halved and quartered, and maybe in some cases to 10% of what they were. And then you will have affordability, and then you will have some of these service workers to finally be able to live in the city in which they work again. And you might have a class of people, I don't mean a class meaning financial or race or creed or anything, a certain class of people that we would justify by their jobs, the types of jobs, that will say, you know, I love the city, but, you know, I'm willing to drive an hour or even two to get into the city, because it's a monumental event that I do once or twice a month, or maybe once a weekend. And I go there, and we'll spend some time at an Airbnb or other type of thing, and we'll do the theater, and we'll do a breakfast, a brunch, lunch, and a dinner in the city, and we go home. And so it becomes a different vitality in that city. And what I'm predicting, and again, it sounds like it's contradictory. I'm predicting that cities are going to be revitalized to a level that we've never seen before. And some of those spaces that had Chase Bank at every corner, they're going to be gutted, and they're going to have little entrepreneurial businesses, people that are immigrants to this country, kids that couldn't have afforded to open up a business in the city. And, now they're getting, 1/10 the square foot to open up their little business, and they thrive. I grew up in the credit card business, and I thrived on small businesses. And I would look at the investments they would give in these small ideas that they would thrive into great ideas. It required low cost real estate, and the cities eradicated that. I mean, where could you find a place for a small business to open up in New York or San Francisco? You couldn't, or LA, in the hot parts of LA. So it's coming back, and yeah, it's going to extend down the hub and spokes in Jersey. And then some of these people will say, well, it's getting a little too crowded here, I'll go a little further out. And then they'll start seeing the amenities of living in, a coastal region or a mountain region. And then, that'll change. And then, you'll start seeing businesses go out there. So it's going to be extending the population and extending the wealth. And I think it's all ultimately a good thing. Short term, it's a very, very painful thing for everybody.
Thanks, Tom. That was an excellent question. Brian, would you come back sometime?
Anytime. I'd be honored.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because next time I really just want to let the group really pick your brain, because a lot of them don't know you in the Canadian space, and now they've just gotten an introduction, and I'm sure they have a lot of questions and they would like to know more. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask for our moment of silence. If everybody will just take a minute, and then Brian will sign off. And when we sign off, when I come back, I just want to find out where people can find out more information about you besides your Twitter. So real quick, moment of silence. All right. R.I.P. Eddie. What you got for where people can find you, Brian? Because I know they're going to want more.
Oh, well, I got my dog barking. Hold on here.
That's a sign of a good person. Anybody has a dog is fine by me. So
I'm obviously at the office here. Let me mute her. Sorry about that.
No,
so
no worries.
my first and last name, you could get the spelling from the show.
Yep.
On any social media. I use Twitter as mostly my feed, but I do long form on Quora. There's a body of work that spans about 12 years out there, and I'm always here to answer questions. My DMs are open, so if you want to contact me, I'm always here to do private consultations and symposiums. I do a lot of that. In fact, I got 4 lined up for today. And I'm here to try to share as much knowledge as I can. And I'd be so honored to be back here and to answer questions. This is sort of my home space, finance and banking. I spend a tremendous amount of my life dealing with banks and working with banks.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch base too a little more on the economic future in terms of what you've seen based on your card stuff. So we'll definitely have you back. Thank you everyone for another great one. Obviously this will be posted online. Brian will make sure you get a copy of it. And Brian, I can't thank you enough. Go get hiking, man. Get out of here. Go ahead, enjoy yourself in Wyoming.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. Gratitude.
And thanks for coming in. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.